Well, hello and welcome to the third class. Good to have you today. We're going to be talking about one of my favorite topics, which has to do with nonprofit boards and governance. And I would say I feel passionate about a lot of nonprofit work, but if there was a particular area that I felt extremely passionate about, it would definitely be this, the area of nonprofit boards. I have the privilege, and I call it a privilege, of working with hundreds of boards. There are some fantastic boards and some that aren't so fantastic. Um, the truth is, most of the people who work on nonprofit boards are good-hearted people who truly care about the cause, but most have not been trained. So as a result, you find there are lots and lots of people on boards who really, quite honestly, just don't know what they're supposed to be doing. I put this up, and actually this is just a little bit outdated in that I I've shifted off some of these now, and I'm on some that aren't listed here. But I am on the Ozarks Regional YMCA board, and we're a great organization. We have two Y facilities in Springfield. Our association also oversees and runs the Y in Monette, Hollister, Buffalo, Bolivar, Cassville. We have a camp, so it's a pretty good size operation. I'm on the statewide nonprofit association board called Nonprofit Missouri. I was the chair. I just rolled off of that. I'm on an advisory board for an organization called Isabel's House. It's a crisis nursery for children and families. And I'm on a couple other boards. Most of them deal with poverty. I'm on a board in another county that deals with community development. So when I talk about boards, whether I'm training a board or researching a board, I can speak as a person who's run an organization and has worked with boards, and as a person who sits on boards currently and has been on other boards, as well as a person who's studied boards a lot. So I kind of come from all different angles. So we're going to talk a little bit about the roles and responsibilities of being on a board, and we're going to talk about board behaviors and responsibilities versus staff, executive directors, some of the charges of being on a board, legal and ethical, as well as the role of a board in fundraising. Let's look quickly at some of the readings that you will read or have read this week. So the Stanford reading is a really interesting reading. I want to change this real quick. The Stanford reading basically polled directors and board members and asked them how things are going. So the Stanford reading says 20% of directors don't believe their board members quite understand the mission and strategy, and I would agree with that. I work with a lot of boards, and some of them aren't even sure of the programs that exist inside the organization. And I have a thing where I like to pull them out into the other room and talk to them one at a time. And I will ask them to cite the organization's mission. And you know, most of them give sort of the same answer, but it's never exactly the same answer. So I agree there's a lot of confusion and a lack of awareness on exactly what they should be doing. About 1/3 said executive directors said they're not satisfied with the board's ability to evaluate, and actually most of the next ones have to do with data. So you find, we'll talk a little bit about this in the class, but you find a lot of organizations, people are passionate about a cause. They love puppies, they love people, but they aren't really passionate about the analytical side, the data side. And that's one of the tipping points for organizations, is being able to be accountable, to have clear outcomes and goals and benchmark indicators. And if organizations don't have those, then they probably don't know if they're actually succeeding or not. So you can see these numbers here. 92% say that their board reviews data, but they really don't know about the quality of it or how in depth. Almost half say directors have no confidence that the boards are actually looking closely at the measures to move them forward toward the mission. And more than half of the nonprofit boards don't benchmark their performance against other nonprofits to see if they're doing as well, and I would say that number is even higher. Most organizations have no clue what other organizations are doing. And then they did engage the board members and ask them, how do you think the organization's doing? Well, look at them, they're happy. 9 out of 10 say they think the CEO does a great job, and 85% are happy with the organization's performance. Now, that could relate back to them really not being engaged in the data themselves and even knowing what they're supposed to be doing, or if they're doing well at all, or maybe they're happy that the CEO is doing the bulk of the work and they don't have to. And I guess I'm framing that in such a negative way, and I shouldn't. But in many cases, and I'm talking again as a board member, you're busy and you roll into meetings and you're glad to see that things are getting done, and you're just happy about that. So if you have a CEO who's really doing a good job, you're really happy. So the challenges that are still out there for organizations, almost 70%, they still have board problems. They don't have the right people on the board, or board members aren't engaged. About 30% are having financial woes. I bet that number is actually higher. A lot of organizations that I work with are just trying to figure out how to keep this thing moving forward. About a fourth of them over the past couple of years have had to ask the CEO to leave. And that's, sometimes it's just not a good fit and things don't work out, whether it's the board's fault or the CEO's fault or really nobody's fault. And then 16% are having a hard time recruiting. And I actually think that number is way higher than that. Maybe they're having a hard time recruiting because they don't define themselves. They don't have clear benchmark indicators, or they're just not as clear about their work, so people are not attracted to be on their board. Okay, and then some of the recommendations. Recommendation number 1, organizations need to align their skills and resources with their mission, especially as this relates to boards. Now, you want to bring people on your board. So if you need somebody who's good with numbers, you bring on an accountant. You need somebody you do healthcare, you need somebody from the bank, from the hospital, you bring them on. You want to make sure you have those right connections. Have good, clear outcomes and goals. Have, again, number 4, KPIs, key performance indicators. Make sure you know what you're trying to do and if you're on track. And then have those same kinds of accountabilities for your staff, but the board only manages the CEO. So make sure you have those and you have consistent follow-up, and that helps everybody to stay on track. Again, accountability and transparency are the hallmarks of excellent nonprofit organizations. So we want to make sure we're doing those. And again, fill your board with good people who have the resources and the connections and the willingness to do the work. Make sure they understand their roles and responsibilities. Have good committees. We'll look a little bit about the committees coming up. And then regularly review the membership's leadership's contributions to make sure that you have people who are really doing what they said they would do and they're supposed to do. All right, so again, the board is ultimately responsible to the community. When I talk to boards about their role, one of the things I say is, you should think of your work in a very broad sense. You're not here just to help the organization, you're actually here to help the community. And in the eyes of the law, the board members are legal officers of the entity, which means that they're basically responsible for everything that happens in the name of the organization, even if they didn't formally approve it. So governance then is the act of leading, guiding, and making decisions. Look at this, not just for the organization, but on behalf of the broader community and the people you serve. So your board may have 12 people, but you may serve 1,200 or 12,000 people a year. Now, you can't have 12,000 people in a room. You can't have 1,200 people in a room. So those people are counting on you. Those donors that give money every month, those foundations that give money, they're counting on you as a board member to make good choices. They're counting on you as board members to make choices, to keep this thing on track, to make sure it's moving forward. So in a sense, being on a board is almost like, it's like an elected official. It's like being on city council. It's like being a state representative or a congressman, if you will. The people of your community are counting on you in that boardroom to make good decisions. So true leadership is definitely about mission, vision, and value, and saying this is where we ought to go and this is how we'll get there. But in truth, it's all about bringing the right resources to make sure that you can do it. A couple years ago at the university, a well-meaning vice president was giving me a litany of things I should do. And I smiled and said, in my most diplomatic way, I really like that you have vision, but may I remind you that vision without resources is delusion. And I want you to remember that as you move into leadership positions, or if you're sitting on a board, we need and want vision, but part of your job is to bring in the resources to see that vision become a reality. So vision without resources is delusion. Okay, let's switch gears just for a second and talk about boards versus executive directors. You know, it's really, really critical that both sides understand these differences. Directors need to know what they're supposed to do. CEOs and staff people need to know what they're supposed to do. And you see the little, I have the columns, but I have the little arrow in between. So the main link, the connector between the board and the executive director is going to be the board president primarily, but also just the executive officers of the board, and then to a lesser degree, the entire board. So a good board is about governance primarily. You set the parameters, you set the policies and procedures, and then you hire smart people to come in and execute those, and you get out of the weeds, you get out of the way. Now, it doesn't always work just like that. I mean, sometimes you have to get involved, but ideally, and especially the bigger the organization, you hire a smart CEO and you let that individual implement in all these policies and procedures. You have the parameters, you have the oversight, you help to set the vision and the benchmark indicators, and you support, but get out of the way. Don't go in there. Don't try to do what the manager or the executive director does. It's really important that these roles are understood and respected, because sometimes you have well-meaning board members who get involved in things that they have no business in, or sometimes you have people who are paid staff, CEOs or executive directors, who have the mindset that they're on the board. And I hate to tell you this, but you're not. You're not on the board. You work for the board, and the board oversees the executive director or the CEO. Those can't become flipped. It's real important that you maintain that healthy balance. So again, the board's big picture, 30,000-foot view, the parameters, the policies and the procedures, and then the executive director's more day-to-day, implementing, carrying out those expectations, handling the details and the matters, and only when needed are board members going to have to become involved in those kinds of activities. Otherwise, the board members are hands-off. They don't get involved at that level. So it's real important that, now there are times, like I said earlier, say the director left and you're shorthanded. You might need board members to hop in and do things they didn't normally do. And again, these things are sort of contingent on the size and operation of the organization. So an organization with 500 employees doesn't need the same board as an organization with 1 or 1/2 time employee who relies more. Now, I don't like the term working board, and I hear that term probably 2 or 3 times a week. Well, we have a working board. Well, I've got news for you. All boards should be working boards. It's almost like it implies some boards are lazy. We're on a lazy board, but here's a working board. Well, they all should be working boards. It's just that they don't all do the same thing. I put this up here, and we'll talk about this some if you're going to take the governance class. But one, I just want to show 2 quick things. Number one, I want to show you this is the pyramid for a healthy organization. 2 things to note about this. Number one, if you're a board member, don't think of yourself at the top of the food chain and you're sitting in a corporate office somewhere passing down information to the lowly bee workers on the ground. The truth is, you're at the bottom because you're the chief servant. You're doing whatever you need to do to make this thing work. And the highest on the chart are the people we serve. And then it moves upward from there. So you can't forget that. You know, we exist to serve a need, an issue, a people, or a cause. That's always at the top of our organizational chart. And then I also put on there this these arrows, which are a bit confusing, but what I want to show again is we don't bypass. So you don't have executive directors who get bypassed. What I mean by that, if like I'm on the board of organizations, I'm not going to call a staff member other than the CEO. I would never call a staff member and say, now I want you to stop what you're doing today and do this or that. I wouldn't do that because they don't technically work for me. They work for the executive director. So if I tell a staff member who's underneath the executive director, if I tell a staff member, you should do this or that, then they're in an awkward position. Do they listen to me or do they listen to their immediate supervisor? We call that triangulation. So we want to make sure that that doesn't occur. We want to respect those boundaries. And likewise, we can't have staff members who maybe are friends with board members and bypass the CEO or executive director because they want to talk personally and privately to a board member. We just can't have that. Okay. All right, now hop into the 3 legal responsibilities of being on a nonprofit board. Responsibility number 1 is called the duty of care. Just a couple things I'll highlight on this. Number 1, everything a board member should do should lead to a good outcome. But I want you to look at this. If you're on a board, it's not just a good idea or suggestion. It is a legal responsibility that you go to board meetings and you go to your special events and galas and fundraisers. If you're on a board and people aren't coming to the board, you're breaking the law. And I'd have to ask you, why do you let them stay on the board? I mean, you're out of compliance. If you don't come to board meetings, you can't be on the board. And we want board members who are real careful with everything they do, from the way they behave in the community to what they're bringing to the board as a whole. This is all part of the duty of care. And I have the little orange box there that says delegate with care. And primarily what I'm talking about there is volunteerism. You know, we're eager to get help. We're eager for any warm body to come in and say, sure, we can use your help. And we give them a name badge and a position out front. Part of the duty of care says, if you're on a board, you have to vet people properly. You have to provide training. You have to oversee them. And that includes volunteers. So make sure if you're on a board, you're doing that properly. You know, I've been on boards where there was this mentality that I worked for the CEO and everything the boss said is what we were supposed to do. And I just want to point out that is not accurate. If I'm on a board, the CEO works for me. And I'm not there just to go rah, 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 whatever you say, boss, we're just here, we love you. And this is especially true with founders, and we'll talk about founder syndrome coming up. But in truth, there may be a powerful person who started the organization and everybody just bows down to this person. That's not a healthy organization. I don't care how long the director's been there or who he or she is. The boards are not just cheerleading squads. We're to provide oversight, careful oversight. We are to ask tough questions and to challenge and always push for the right answer. It doesn't matter who's involved. Second responsibility is the duty of care or duty of loyalty. The duty of loyalty says, again, everything you do is going to be for the best interest of the organization. And it says you're going to avoid conflicts. Primarily, this is 2 things. So conflict of interest would be, of course, financial. You won't get involved in any deals. So you won't benefit from being on the board. You don't get any special deals. If you have a business, you don't get to do business with the organization just because you're on the board. That would be a conflict of interest. It doesn't mean you can't do business. It means you don't necessarily get to do it. And if you do business with the organization, you have to get outside of the boardroom. You can't be part of the discussions or the reviewing of contracts or anything like that. That's off limits. That's a conflict of interest. It's called the law of inurement. And nobody on the board can benefit financially from being part of the board. That's illegal. And then another conflict could be if you sit on multiple boards that have the same cause. So if I'm on the I Love Puppies board, but I'm also on the Humane Society, that's a conflict. Shouldn't have people who are on the same types of boards. And then the third conflict is when you have someone who is a paid staff member and is a close relative of someone on the board. That's a no-no. You can't have a and again, I'm talking about C-level primarily, but C-suites. You can't have a CEO or a CFO, COO be on a paid staff position and then have their spouse or a partner or someone being on the board. That's a direct conflict of interest, because then they're doing the appraisal, review, board salaries and things like that. That can't happen. And I know of situations like that. I'm so troubled by that organizations are okay with that. But I can tell you that's a red flag, and I wouldn't have anything to do with an organization that did that. Okay, third legal responsibility is called the duty of obedience. Basically, it comes down to this. You have to follow the law. Now, that may sound a bit comical to you, but here's what I'm saying. If I'm driving down the highway and the speed limit's 40 and I'm going 75, and let's say I'm driving in a city I've never been. I've never been to Dayton, Ohio, or I've never been to Portland, Oregon. So if I'm driving down a thoroughway that's 40 and I'm going 75, I'm going to get pulled over. And if they say, what are you doing? I said, oh, I didn't know the speed limit. They're not going to say, well, it's okay. Since you didn't know, we're not going to give you a ticket. The truth is, I was playing in their zone and I have to know the rules. Same goes for nonprofits. You could be a little startup organization and just have a tiny little operation, and you say, we don't have enough people to keep up with the changes in tax laws or all the legal requirements of being on a nonprofit. Sorry, but you're not exempt. You have to play by the rules. So this is a challenge. So if you're going to be on a board, you need to know and make sure your organization is following the rules. There are lots of rules. These apply to organizations, whether you have 1 employee or 1,000 employees. So it's up to you as a board member to make sure you follow the laws, federal, state laws, and also your bylaws. And this is important. Your bylaws are a legal document. So whatever you say in your bylaws, you have to follow. If your bylaws say that you can't just bring on board members, you actually have to go through a process, then you better go through a process. You can't bypass that. If you say it takes a certain number of people to have an official board meeting, then you can't have a board meeting if you don't have that number of people, if you don't have a quorum. I'm just saying, follow your own bylaws. So that means you ought to know them or have a copy of them. And it also means that if you have bad bylaws, you ought to change them. Don't just say, well, they're poor bylaws. Well, then change them. But they're a legal document, so you have to follow those. Okay, now we're shifting from the three legal responsibilities to the core or ethical responsibilities. So I briefly mentioned this a while ago, but if you're going to be on a board, one of your primary responsibilities is to provide leadership through mission, vision, values. Where are you going? Are you in the right place now? Is your work relevant? Does it work? Do you have clearly defined goals and objectives? Do you know what you're doing? And then consistently go back and look at those. So I do a lot of strategic planning. That's probably the bulk of what I do in my work at BKD. I mean, I'm always out there doing training. So, and I do it because smart organizations know they need to do that every couple of years. Number 2, establish policies. Again, what I was referring to earlier, most people really stick up their nose. They hate this kind of stuff, but this is important. And here's what I would tell any organization. I know you don't like this kind of stuff, but okay, you want to grow as an organization, you want to thrive, you want to be a big boy organization someday, then you need to do this kind of stuff. You want to be a mom and pop shop and a grassroots little never growing organization, I wouldn't fool with any of this stuff. You don't need it. But I tell you what, if you end up in court someday and you don't have this stuff, you're going to regret it, because it's going to speak volumes to the judge about the professionalism of your organization. So some of this is, I think it's a no-brainer, but you better have good hiring and firing processes. You better have a conflict of interest policy. You better have something in writing about how you protect your data, how you protect the names of the clients you work with. These are really critical things. If you don't know them, hire a professional and help you establish those. Policies are risk management. Your work is too important to leave to chance, so make sure you have the right policies. You want to have the right essentials. You can't do the work if you don't have the right tools. You know, I refer often to carpentry. Could you build a house with a handsaw and a hammer and nails? Yeah. Would it be slick and neat? No, it'd be pretty rough. It'd take a long, long time to do. So that's the same thing with technology. It's the same way with the way you go about your work. Do you have the right software? Do you have the right tools? If you don't, you're probably just limping along. So part of a jobs board then is to set that mission and vision and then bring in the resources so you can actually get that work done. And then once you have the resources, it's the board's job to make sure you're using those properly. They're not a bad board. If they ask you how many miles do you drive that company vehicle? If you say you need a new iPhone because you're calling donors, I need to know how many minutes a month go toward the organization and are there personal minutes. I'm not a bad board member if I do that. In fact, I'm holding you accountable and I'm holding the organization's resources accountable. That's a good steward. But there's this sense among some people that you don't have any business. No, actually I do. And if you're on a board, you should be asking those kinds of questions. And again, the fifth one is just to lead and manage the executive director. The board oversees no one else except the CEO. The CEO oversees all other staff. Again, that line I was talking about earlier. So boards need to be supporting the CEO. They need to have consistent meetings, and that's primarily going to be, again, with the board chair and the executive committee. And then we need to have proper training. So you might hire someone who's really good, and I'm actually working with someone right now who's a social worker, and she in time got promoted as the executive director. So now she has to know HR policies and public relations and fundraising, and she was just a social worker. You know, she just loved kids, but now she has to do it all. So what's happened is she needs somebody who can help her with all these other tasks she has, you know. So I think as a board, we need to make sure we provide the proper training and encouragement. You know, the truth is the work that we do is really hard work. It can be very discouraging. So we want to make sure we have the right encouragement and, you know, do nice things for them. Give them gift certificates, take them out to dinner, or do encouraging things. All right, now let's shift to the third part of this lecture today, and that's about boards and fundraising. You know, I know the pain, okay? I get asked to do my part as a board member too. So I usually ask for a show of hands. How many of you would like to do anything but ask for money? Or you miss a meeting or don't engage, is your board, they miss meetings, or when they do come, they're not engaged. Or your board says their donation is their time, not their actual money. Or they think it's the job of the paid staff members to ask for money. Or your board was recruited and it wasn't clear that they were even supposed to bring in money, right? So this is a lot of boards right here. So that's why sometimes there's a problem. So if you think about how do organizations get money, this is the scope. 72% comes from individuals, small percent from corporations, not counting foundations, 16% from foundations, and 8% from bequests, which are usually individuals, right? So then that means 80% are individuals, and then some of those foundations are private foundations, and they are people too, right? So we could probably say about $90 out of every 100 essentially comes from individuals. So if you talk about what's a high net worth individual, a high net worth individual is someone typically who's worth, well, it could be millions. So a high net worth individual is going to give money, and 50% of the giving, of all giving, comes from high net individuals. And about 2/3 of those like to give to the same causes every year. And look at this, 43% have a will that includes charitable money. Now, again, we're talking about major donors here. So just look at it like this. As we establish, people give to people. Well, Not exactly. People give to the right people. And actually, people will open their doors. They give to great causes, but they'll open their doors only to the right people. So you see what I'm saying here. It's unrealistic. So boards are well connected, and we need board members to actually think about helping to open doors and to get that story, if you will, in front of the right people. So there are probably now pushing 1.7 million nonprofit organizations. And honestly, people want to make a difference. People want to do something. But the only way they can learn about these causes if someone validates it and if it's someone they know and trust. And the way that happens is you have board members who have broad circles, who are usually well connected, and they can connect those high net worth individuals or other individuals to your organizations. So good board members are door openers. So again, how many of you like to ask for money? No hands go up. How many of you like to tell the story of all the great things your organization's doing? Everybody's hand goes up, right? Well, the good news about fundraising, it's primary storytelling. That's primarily all it is, telling stories about the great things going on at your organization. Oh yeah, there's a little more to it, but it's not that much. Okay, so let's look at some traits of effective boards. One, you have to understand the case for support. Okay, so let's say they hear your story and they're excited. In other words, why would I choose you? Why, if I'm going to give to people, organizations that help people or kids or the environment or whatever, but why would I choose yours? So you have to have a strong case. And then you need board members who not only will tell the story, but they're willing to give the time and resources and the money, their own money it takes to make this thing work. If they're not willing to do it, even if they're passionate about telling the story, they're not going to be successful. We need board members who are willing to become educated on how to make an ask. Now, granted, there's an art to it. There's somewhat of a science to how you lead into an ask. We need board members who are active in the planning process and actually active in going out and developing plans and then being part of those. So they'll take time to go out, to meet with donors, to work with staff. And they know that fundraising isn't just the staff's responsibility. And this is especially true in smaller organizations. We need the boards to be involved. So what we want to do is we want to move people from advocates, which are mostly storytellers, over to ambassadors and eventually make them askers. So again, advocates like to tell the story. Maybe they can think of a few names and they can put them on a list, and they might go to some galas or events themselves. Ambassadors are actually going out with staff. They're actually going to make the visit with the development director or the executive director. And then they're starting to identify people they could go out and meet with. And then lastly, the ambassadors become askers when they have the confidence to not only go out and meet, but to start making an ask themselves. They can actually ask people to give again or a first-time giver, and they can take other board members and teach them how to do it. So that's the goal. So building an effective board, basically this is the process. You have to have a committee, and then you set your goals and you decide how much do we want to give? How much should our own people give? How much do we need to bring in? Then have an orientation process. Again, people need to be trained. How do you make an ask? What are the materials you ought to take? Do you call? Do you email? How do you follow up? And then you teach them how to make an ask. You give them experience. You let someone else do it. They watch, and in time, they become good at doing it themselves. So we move from the recruitment down to the engagement. You can't just cast people into the fire and they join the board and next week ask them to go out and ask for $10,000 or $50,000. That's just unrealistic. So engagement begins with thank you. So, you know, a phone call right away. A repeat donor. We want to make sure. So I would say we do that for all new gifts or above average gifts. If they're above average or it's a new gift. Now, again, you know, somebody who attended an event one time and never gave anything else, that's different. We can segment that data. But somebody who gave it a gift and is interested, we absolutely must follow up. I believe in a 48-hour rule, and I know organizations that have a 24-hour rule. I don't care what the gift is. You get a card out, you thank them. That's how you be different. Handwritten, you know, in the world of digital emails and Hallmark electric cards or whatever else, Facebook icons or emojis or whatever you want to send, take time to write a card. It's more special today than it's ever been because it's becoming so obsolete. Say a note about how the money will be used. In time, be sure and report back the impact of that gift and do that in person. So board members can use their social media. They should be posting things. They should be talking about the organization. They should repost good things, and then share information. Remind people you're part of the work and that they should be part of it too. So 10 responsibilities of every board member. I believe every board member should be giving and making an ask. I mean, you want to see where someone's priorities are, see where they give their money. So every board member should be making a personal gift, and every board member should be involved in some way in understanding the program and being involved in helping thank and ask. Identify donors and asking. Get out and cultivate those, and then encourage activities. Go to your galas, help get sponsorships, and really engage your friends. All right, I want to talk, as we wrap this up today, I want to talk about 3 upcoming assignments. Assignment 3 is going to be a board survey, so you should start soon if you haven't already. Set this up. It has to be a registered 501c3 organization, and now they have to be wherever you exist. They need to be in your region, and it has to be a legitimate group because I'm going to go in and check them. They should have a website. They should have a 990 out there. And you're actually going to do 3 groups because I've given you in the assignment details 3 different budget ranges, and then you're going to do the survey. So really, again, look at the questions, look at what I'm asking, take the data, synthesize it, think about it, and then write it up. But don't just put the question in, copy and paste the response in. I expect more follow-up than that. Assignment number 4 has to do with you interviewing a nonprofit or civic leadership, and they must be over an organization that addresses poverty, because this ties right into the articles you're going to read that week. It goes right into the toxic charity book and the article on asset-based community development. And then I want you to see how what they do aligns with this. And be careful that we don't frame it in a way that we're shaming them if they don't do it, but you're going to take their responses and then hold those up against the 2 things, or the 2 different sources I gave you right there. And then assignment 5 has to do with collaborations. And again, you're going to be looking in your region to identify collaborations that are going to occur, and you're going to identify those and talk about what they look like and what they're made of. So that's it for today. Look forward to talking to you, and as always, feel free to email me. There's my email, and let me know if there's anything I can do to help.